Good morning, everyone. I'm here to talk to you about creating a career plan. So, kind of getting yourself to take charge of your career plan and learning how to get noticed, and then learning how to present your best self in your profession. And obviously, I'm talking to a bunch of clinical research professionals and hope that this will be helpful for you as you progress in your career, whether you're getting started or you've been in the industry several decades like I have been. This is just to kind of help you edify who you are, brand yourself appropriately. And so we'll go ahead and get started. So, first of all, I just need to disclose that I have no financial disclosures or conflicts of interest with the material in this presentation, and the views are of my own and represent no other company or institution in the past or in the present. So, my objectives for you are five different areas. We're going to go over image. We're going to go over professional development. We're going to go over this thing that we call the CV. Sometimes outside of research, we call that the resume. And so I'll kind of go over the differences and what those are. And then we're going to talk about social media. And then we're going to, the last point is kind of reviewing the above four. And so hopefully you will walk away with these objectives. This is about a 45-minute presentation, but it will take you quite some time to get through each of these points as you work on your career plan. So, to kind of let you know why this is important, as we kind of grow in this field, we want to make an impact, right? And sometimes articulating who we are and what we're about, where we've been, where we're going, is hard to put on paper. Sometimes some of us are better in person and able to speak verbally to connect with others. Others would prefer to just put it down on paper. Others might do really well in a video that's pre-recorded. There's so many ways to present yourself. And so this is kind of tying all the different pieces and how you can do that. And so hopefully this will help you, like I said, whether it's progressing forward, staying where you're at, taking on and getting new projects. Hopefully this will help you do that. So first I want to talk about image, right? And so this is my mugshot here from a couple years ago. And so I want you to think about image, right? Most of us will think about it just the external, the physical, the outside. And so we want to define what it is and how we can accentuate it. And so we all have pros and cons, we all have strengths and we have weaknesses. And the best thing you can do for yourself is to highlight your strengths, know that you have weaknesses, and work on those, but maybe you don't state those, right? But you really want to highlight your strengths, right? Your skill set. And then accentuating, when I say that, I'm talking about your image. If you have a picture you don't like, don't post it, right? If you have a picture that you're proud of and you feel good about, that's the one you want to share. And so your image, why it really matters, it establishes credibility. Okay. So right away, when someone meets you, it is their first impression. And their first 10 seconds, they're making a decision. Do they want to get to know you or do they want to not spend any more time with you? Right. And there's something about creating a human connection after that first impression, right? Either you do want to connect or you don't want to connect, right? And maybe it doesn't matter if you want to connect or not. Maybe you're forced to be in this relationship for work. Because sometimes we work with people that we absolutely adore, and sometimes we work with people that we don't get along, personally, but we have to get along professionally because maybe we have these objectives that we have to meet and we've got to get it done. So the image does represent credibility, right? And so think about where your image resides on the internet, in person. Think about pictures, think about videos, think about publications, think about what another employer or another coworker or someone in the community, what would they say about you, right? So that's why it matters, because you're trying to build credibility, whether it's a current relationship, whether it's salvaging a previous relationship, whether it's building a new relationship. It really matters because of the credibility. And like I said, it creates that human connection for better or for worse. And it's also a first impression. And so the definition from Oxford Languages, and it's kind of the oldest dictionary around for over 150 years, it's the one that Google uses. Everyone loves to use Google Chrome. So they define image as, number one, a representation of the external form of a person or a thing in art, right? So that's like that physical exterior context, right? Another definition is the general impression of that person. And it also states organization or a product. presented to the public, right? So this isn't talking about just the exterior. It's kind of talking about the inside. How does this person leave others? What is their impression? What is the feeling that they leave with them? Do they feel good? Do they feel bad? Do they think, man, this is a really negative person? This is a really positive person? This person's bleh, right? And so that's more to personality, probably soft skills, right? And you have to think of this in cultural context. And what I mean by that is in the United States, we're pretty much a very friendly group, East Coast versus West Coast. There might be some similarities, some differences, the North and the South, right? But for the most part in the US, most profile pictures that you'll see, people smile in their profile pictures. In other countries, that may not be it, right? And because in the US, we often smile a lot, we interact with people with a smile, with a firm handshake, contact in the eyes, right? In other cultures, that may not be the same. So kind of be familiar where you're meeting people and what that image is and what is socially accepted in that culture. Okay. And then finally, Oxford Languages defines image as kind of a simile or like a metaphor. So it's more of like a poetic. And so, you know, you just kind of think about what kind of image do I want to leave behind? What kind of image do I want to portray? So again, going back to strengths and going back to weaknesses, highlight your strengths. You don't want to leave people knowing and feeling like, well, she doesn't know how to do this and she doesn't know how to do that. Leave them, this is what she does know, right? And people really love conviction and they love confidence. And so think about the things that make you you. And so that's the image I'm going for. Not necessarily external, mostly internal, right? Kind of these emotions. And so here's a quote that I wanted to share. Behavior is the mirror in which everyone shows their image, right? So, someone can be really beautiful, but they're not a good person, right? But I think that all good people are actually beautiful people, right? Because by their behavior, you'll know kind of the image or the perception of that person overall, right? Is that someone I want to work with and will enjoy working with? Or is that someone that, they really know what they're doing, but maybe we don't hang out at a happy hour? Okay. And so we're going to go ahead and take any questions and pop up a poll here. Okay, so the second objective is about professional development. And so I'd like you to explore and plan out what you want to develop professionally and even personally, right? Because truly those are intertwined. And so I apologize for some of these graphics. The career and personal development is kind of, are you where you want to be going, right? And I mentioned career and personal because this has to do with your hard skills and your soft skills, right? And so hard skills, everyone pretty much when they start a new job or have a job, they know what they're supposed to do. There's specific tasks, there's probably SOPs around said task, there's work instructions, job aids, all sorts of descriptions to help you determine how you do the job, when you do the job, how often you do the job. And so they're pretty spelled out, right? But then you have these soft skills, which are more speaking to personality and the way in which you go about it, right? So I often think about, cooking. So if I have a recipe and I want to make chicken fettuccine alfredo, right? And so I follow the recipe. Typically, I will follow a recipe straight through the way it's written. But after the first time, I kind of tweak it to how I enjoy it or my family will enjoy it. Maybe we like less salt on that chicken, and that recipe wanted it fried, but we actually like to eat more grilled chicken, right? And so we kind of tweak it to our own preferences and kind of to our own likings. Maybe it wasn't creamy enough, so I tweak the ingredients. And so those are the soft skills that make it mine, right? And so soft skills are harder to teach because they're all unique to each and every one of us, but they're also a really great skill to understand because the better you are at your soft skills, sometimes those hard skills make it, the soft skills make the hard skills a lot easier. Okay. And so some things to develop. So we're looking at kind of higher education, right? So that's kind of your master's and beyond. The education could be, like I said, a formal degree. So often, many of us already have formal degrees, or maybe we know that we're not going beyond the master's. Some people really want to get that PhD or a double PhD, right? So these are questions you have to ask yourself. What do I want to upskill? Maybe it's a certification. Maybe it's a training. Maybe it's some other credential that you want to add. Certainly, a lot of people that I know in research like to get project management, and that's a really great one. But you also have to think about your resources, right? Do I have the time, the financial resources, and the effort in my chapter in life right now to be pursuing that, right? So some of us can pursue that master's or that doctorate and beyond. Some of them maybe want to do something a lot quicker, and we're just trying to get a skill right now, right? And this third one that I want to talk about is kind of mentorship. So it could look in the form of a formal internship where you go on site somewhere and you're kind of observing day to day practices and tasks and activities. And that may go hand in hand with like a higher education. It could be a volunteer internship. If it's not paid, it's typically called an externship. Or you can just call it volunteering. Sometimes sites, other offices are willing to show after you sign, confidentiality agreements and whatnot, to kind of allow you to learn. Maybe they're hiring. Maybe they want to try you on, and you want to try them on. It's a great way to learn about a particular site or a particular organization at that institution. Sometimes they're hard to secure, but it's not impossible. I've definitely seen it done in my time. And then networking and coaching, right? So these, again, these have to do with kind of one-on-one, maybe small group onto like a mentor relationship where you're learning from other people, right? And so they tend to be more soft than hard skills, right? I really enjoy that SOCRA office offers so much CE in their local chapters. I miss the days when we met in person. So next year at annual conference, we'll get to see you in person and shake hands and truly have those side conversations, right? And network and coach and mentor and lead and follow, right? And so when you think about your development, you might be learning just picking up that one little tool, right? On the far right hand side is what I'm talking about. And they might be willing to share said tool or a tip or a technique that they do on site or at that office or at that institution. Whereas these other trainings, the higher degree or the certification, that really doesn't have to do with a soft skill one-on-one interaction, right? It's something that you typically sign up for. It's typically something you have to pay for, right? So think about what it is. What are your strengths? Do you want to continue to highlight those strengths? What are your weaknesses? How can you make those weaknesses be better, right? So maybe it's a technical skill. I've seen some of my colleagues who started out not knowing very much about, say, Excel. And so through Linda Learning, they kind of learned how to get better at Excel. And so one person just kind of wrote down all the things like the different functions, the VLOOKUPs and all the different functions of Excel and creating tables and things like that. And she was really dedicated and spent a good 6 months just learning Excel inside and out because it was so important to our job. And I was really proud of her just because she went from, I can't, I'm old, I don't know how to do this, it's too hard. It would be easier if someone did it for me. But I'm really big on helping someone to learn a skill and then they can have that skill for life rather than doing it for them, right? And so I kind of stand in the middle, out of these three with the certifications. I enjoy kind of the classroom interaction. I'm in a time in my chapter where formal education, I don't quite have the time and resources because I have a family who, you know, they're all over the place, so I don't have that much time to dedicate for the next few years to myself, nor do I need to. Some people feel that they need to. I'm very happy where I'm at. So I tend to stick in the middle with the certifications, different like academies, like 5-week training, kind of short term, right? So this is something that you have to ask yourself, am I happy where I'm at? Is there anything I can improve? And if there is, what direction do I want to go? And then once you've identified where you want to go, then you kind of map that out, right? And is this going to affect you just career wise? Maybe it'll affect you personally, right? So, in talking about soft skills, it could be about presenting, it could be about eye contact, it could be about how to be professional, right? What is professional language? What does it look like as you project your image in public speaking, things like that. So there's a lot to learn, lots of resources out there. Google certainly is a great resource to go ahead and look. If you belong to any kind of SOCRA organization or chapter thereof, um, LinkedIn, Facebook, there's lots of groups that you can join and kind of participate in conversations about different kinds of learning that you can add. And so these things you can add to your CV. And so, which is what we're going to be talking about next. Okay. And so the curriculum vitae is something that I didn't know it was a thing until I started in research. Most of us grew up knowing that we had to have a resume, and it probably started in high school or shortly after high school into college, and especially during college, right? The resume was kind of something that represented who you are, what you've done, and maybe some education, right? And, please pick me in a job setting. When I got my first research job, I was asked to really add a lot of detail to it so I could turn it into a CV. I didn't know what CV stood for. When I looked at others, I saw that it was spelled out as curriculum vitae. I saw a lot of bio sketches as well, if any of you are familiar with those. Those are kind of these federal bio sketches which are similar to CVs, but they even have more information. And so in this section, I want to go over kind of what you're building on paper now, right? Because this is after maybe there's no opportunity to meet a real life person, and it simply is sending out an email to introduce yourself. And so you really want to brand this to be yours, right? This is something that represents you. Is it really going to be printed out, or is it just going to be showing up on a screen? And most of the time these days, I remember when paper was really popular. I even actually remember when you would apply to a job to a newspaper ad, and you would write down the address, and you actually would send in your cover letter and your resume, and then you would address it and have a stamp, and you would mail it in, right? And that's a time when using your personal home mailing address was very appropriate. Today, you can often apply for jobs online, never having to print anything or buy stamps, and making sure that they all connect and get sent in the mail and don't get lost, right? So when we compare what a CV and a resume are, these are kind of some general tips or general things that I've seen. In a CV kind of shows to the world, right, that this person has credibility. These are the things that this person has done. So it supports the credentials of that person, so that education that we just talked about, and experience, right? Experience in work, right? For someone just starting out brand new, they won't have a lot of experience, and hopefully the person looking at that will understand that. And I like to see it as, or describe it as, kind of the main course, right? So it's everything about this person. It is typically a lot longer and very detailed, and it has all this information about this person from publications and studies that they've worked on, maybe sponsors they've worked on or worked with, companies they've worked at, how long they've been at those companies. Whereas a resume, kind of how I was taught, it really is just very brief, if possible, 1 to 2 pages. And so it's short, but it's very high level. I call it kind of the appetizer, right? Sometimes when you go to a restaurant, you order something, and that typically is telling if you're going to be enjoying the meal, right? But more importantly, it is to kind of gain interest for people to look at you further, right? Whether it's for a job or a new project, whatnot, right? It really is to get noticed. So typically it's kind of, aha, like go ahead and take a look at me. Whereas CV is, okay, when there are multiple pages, like more than 2 pages, you have to think about how many CVs or how many resumes is this person going to have to look at, right? And how do I make mine stand out? And so this is a Venn diagram. So you see in the middle, there's like this tiny overlap, right? Both of them should highlight you, right? What are the key traits, skills? What are the experiences and education that you have that you want this company to know about you, or this person, or whatever this project might be? And oftentimes they use this to confirm, to kind of reconcile your experiences in education. They're going to fact check you, right? The World Wide Web is amazing because you can Google pretty much everything, and they can look and see, did she really graduate from that school, right? And they have the right to go kind of check for it, right? And so it's showing that evidence, right? So they're looking at, is this true against what you say it is, right? So often when you turn in, or any of us turn in a CV or a resume, the first thing a potential recruiter will do is they'll probably Google the name of that candidate, and they're going to find them on social media, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And they're going to start looking at images and postings and engagement and interactions with other people, right? Because they're trying to build the soft side of this person, right? And they're going to try to determine, do these check out? So whatever that source is, right? If you're already working on a site and I am your CRA, I'm going to be looking for, okay, on the DOA, right? If you're responsible for drawing blood, in my mind, I would think that you have some sort of phlebotomy training, right? Maybe you went to a school for it. Maybe you just got trained and you have 10 years of experience, right? And so that's what I would be looking for to kind of fact check whatever is stated on that document. And so something that I also like to highlight when we're kind of creating our CV/resume, I typically, be proud of the most top three things in your resume, but your CV, go ahead and be proud of all the things, right? And so you kind of want to share those awards, recognize why they're significant to you. So it could be a team triumph, right? As a team, collectively, you did this, right? Maybe it's an individual honor. You not only graduated with your master's, but you're also graduating with honors while you were raising a family, right? And working a job. So be proud of that. Maybe the whole institution has a win, and you know that as not only just as a team, but multiple teams came together to make this happen. I've helped open up several sites, and we certainly had institutional wins when we knew that we met a certain recruitment goal because we had some good retention strategies and it required kind of the whole institution to buy into it. And so the example I'm thinking of is we had like a special reserved parking spot for our research patients at a very busy campus. And so research patients knew that they had front parking, premier parking that they could park at and not have to park a mile away and ride the shuttle, right? And that was a win, not just for our own little building, but a lot of research kind of saw that as an opportunity to help engage our patients. So department victories, right? So maybe it's not as big as an institution, but it's smaller than an institution, but it's bigger than a team, right? So maybe it's just your one department. Definitely celebrate those. Maybe it's your subjects, right? Maybe you're able to achieve 90% of your subjects starting the trial and finishing the trial. Maybe it was really difficult to recruit, and now it isn't, right? Celebrate everything, you guys. FDA approvals. I've seen people state, I helped start this trial at phase one, and after running phase one trials and phase two and phase three, after 17 years, I was able to see this product go through, right? Or maybe you were only part of that phase three, and you're able to see the success of that FDA approval. I personally like FDA approvals because that helps me understand where people started in their career or where they were in their career. It lets me know kind of where I was, and it makes me relate to them a little bit better. And so definitely share these things. Now, kind of the do's and don'ts of your professional CV. So I've kind of put it in green and in red. And so even though I say your CV should be detailed, you do want to keep it as short as possible. You do want to keep it concise, and you definitely want to keep it relevant. And so oftentimes you have to look at, is this still relevant 23 years later? Is this still relevant today, right? And so think about that. You want to be consistent in your font, right? So it's generally accepted to have a 12-point font for the majority of the body of that CV. Ideally, using the same font throughout the entire document. So don't change from one font type to a different font type. But it is very appropriate to use your bold, your underline, your italics, and your bullets when it makes sense. To think about if bullets makes more sense, or numerically assigning them might make more sense. I was kind of taught if it was more than five, go ahead and start numerating. If it's less than five, then you can go ahead and bullet. Um, so just kind of think about how it looks, right? If you don't have numerals in your CV anyway, so maybe don't use that. Maybe it forces you to keep it five or less bullet points, right? And then this is kind of, I've heard this back and forth if this is helpful. If you're applying for a job, using graphics and visuals is not a good way to display information. But at the same time, if it's a smaller company that's not using scanners or readers, having any kind of graphics or visuals gets to kind of showcase, like, hey, I want to show you kind of my visuals. Maybe it could be a pie chart, and your pie chart shows what your top five interests in therapeutic areas are, or maybe it's your experience in therapeutic areas. And so maybe in your 20-year career, 10 of it has been dedicated to oncology, 20% to ophthalmology, and then you have the remainder as in other therapeutic areas. That's just kind of a visual graphic that you could use. I've seen people put it in bar graphs just to display the skill sets that they have, maybe from, strongest to weakest. And then, so kind of determine if that's helpful or not. Like I said, it's debatable if it's helpful or not because scanners don't pick up on that. And then you want to certainly group like items together. So if we're talking about education, keep education in one area. And then education, like I said, can encompass that professional development, whether it's just a degree or it's a degree plus all of these, certifications and credentialing, and then maybe these other like mentorships, formal internships, things like that. So it shows that you're kind of this lifelong learner. And I have seen people list kind of memberships of groups that they belong to. So they may not have a certification, but they belong to that organization because of content, right? And so in the red, I have kind of the things that you probably shouldn't do. So don't list all the studies that you've ever touched, including the ones that you're a backup for, right? It doesn't. It's not as meaningful, right? Maybe you state within the last 2 years the projects you've worked on, um, and then you can say, from this time to this time, especially people who've worked in the field for a long time, have worked on 57 trials to date. These represent the last 2 years or 5 years of my experience, right? Because no joke, I've seen CVs be as long as 85 pages. No one wants to read an 85-page CV, right? Now we're wondering, is this really legit? Is it really true and accurate? And that may bring more emphasis to the CV, and people might pick it apart, right? And so pick the ones that really matter, right? Maybe where you're the first author or the first five, in that publication, or one that you're really proud of, right? Because you're passionate about it, because it means a lot to you. And so those are just kind of some tips on when you have a long list of something, whether it's the studies, the publications. Those are the ones I see the most often. So don't use different fonts, right? Um, I've heard different font sizes can make sense if it's the same font. You kind of have to play with it. I like the different font sizing, meaning my header and my footer are a much smaller font size because I just want to make sure they know it's page 1 of 8, page 7 of 8, so they know that there's 8 pages and that they have each unique page, right? But they don't need to see it in my 12-point font, I don't think. It's just more of a friendly thing that makes it mine. And then I highly recommend not listing your home address or any other personal information. Like I said, I've started in the field a long time. And I remember when we used to even write down like our social security number, our home address. Um, and home address, like I said, when you're applying to a job via the newspaper, that's when home addresses really matter because that was your mailing address, right? These days, so often you're just submitting a job application online. They really only need your email address. Like, do they really need to know where you live? And some of your really nosy Nellies might be out there Google Earthing where this person lives, right? Do they really need to do that? No, but you just gave them that information, so why not, right? So let's kind of refrain from giving out any more than we have to. I remember working with investigators who listed, they had been married so many times and had so many kids, right? Personal. You don't really need to state that in there, right? So just think about how you can subtract because that doesn't really matter. If you do feel so inclined, or if a recruiter says, we need to know kind of at least your state, then go ahead and put the state. Maybe you can put metropolitan Phoenix, right? And so that kind of narrows it down, but it's not the full address. And then the last don't I have here is don't scatter information everywhere. And that kind of goes, right against the, do group like items together. So I have reviewed many CVs and resumes in my lifetime, helping friends, students, and others. It can be really hard to follow if we see a bachelor's and then but then we don't see a close date, so we don't know if they actually got their bachelor's or if it's still ongoing. But then later on we see this master's, and then we have more studies, and then there's, all of a sudden there's this doctorate degree. Like, put them all together so it's easy to follow. Okay, this is what they have as far as education goes, this is what they have as far as a list of studies. Okay, so this is actually a CV that I had to revamp a couple years ago. And it just kind of displays how it went from 8 pages, right? And it's really long and it was pretty boring, right? And then I was kind of trained how to cut it in half, right? Put in the things that really matter, using bold, using spacing, using visuals, and so that the reader would very quickly be able to go through it and understand who I am, what I have, and what I could bring value to that company, right? So it's better. It's still not the best, right? But it's better than this typical one or this really long one, right? And so you kind of think about, how do we make it meaningful? How do we make it more concise? Okay, so the next item is the power of social media. Okay, so I know that a lot of people get really nervous when they hear this, but it really isn't as scary as it sounds. And so I want you to understand what it is and how you can harness the power of social media. So most of us know social media as a place where you can post information, discuss, engage. And it can be really fun and it can be really exciting, but it can also be really damaging. So you have to be careful in how you use it. Okay. So again, I apologize for how these slides are coming up, but I want to go over each of these points with you. LinkedIn is viewed as typically the professional social media network, right? And so it's a place, it's a platform that brands you, and it brands you based on what you put into it. So you may as well put in what highlights you, what strengthens you, to be at your very best self, right? Because, like I said, you have this CV that lives out there, or a resume that's super short, right? Or you have this, job application. Sometimes people don't even take CVs or resumes, and you fill out the job application. And when that recruiter, when that hiring manager goes to look you up, hopefully you have a LinkedIn profile. Maybe you also have Facebook or Instagram. And so they're going to be reconciling, does it match against what this person is saying, right? And I've heard people say that they might have a LinkedIn that they created a long time ago, but they don't use it anymore. So go ahead and take it down, deactivate it, right? There's lots of opinions around this. The main opinion is that, well, they are interested in this job, but they don't care enough to update their social presence, right? Why not remove that doubt and just deactivate it? Um, I'm pretty active on my social media for LinkedIn for various purposes, mostly because there are lots of great content and discussions out there on best practices, GCP. And so I like to be on those discussions, or kind of understand how some of these sites and people are thinking. One that I'm passionate about is diversity. And so it's been really neat to see all the discussions. And so it's important to think about why it's important, right? And so if people were to look at my activities, they would say to themselves, man, this girl's really passionate about diversity, right? And equity and inclusion. But you would see also, I've been singing that song since about 2000, when I first got started in this industry as well. And so it's not um, a buzzword that I'm using because it's popular and it's trending now. But if you were to look at my profile, you would understand that I've been singing that song and dancing that dance for a long time. And so maintain a current and a complete profile. Find a mentor, find a friend, find someone who can help look at your profile and objectively say, that's your best picture. That's not your best picture. Can we state this a little bit differently so it doesn't come off that way, right? And so having like someone to help you, maybe you look at theirs and they look at yours, that always works really great as well. But that always looks good, right? Because this is the process of shining you up, right? Making you more credible. It might be a little bit bumpy in the beginning, but it does take some time, but it's well worth it. Okay. And then the second one is supposed to say engage actively. And so, actively, regularly, frequently, define for yourself what that is. Is that about every 2 weeks? Is that daily? Some people like post like 3 times a day, right? And so, this is such a personal decision and how you want to engage. And engage means whether you post something or you just comment on someone's post, right? You engage. Um, People will know if you're only there and you're just standing on a mountain and you're shouting, versus standing on a mountain and shouting, but then coming down and having conversations with other people on their mountains, talking about the issues, right? So it has to be more than just about posting. It's about supporting other people's content in their posts, in the articles that they share. There's so many ways to engage, right? You can just share an article that you really enjoy, right? It may be professional, it may be a little bit funny, but still professional, right? Again, this is a professional network to use and to harness. You want to follow people of good reputation and rapport. Some people may not have a very good one, right? And think about that public view, right? And how that might affect you. So be smart about who you're connected with and who you follow, what you follow. And then the last thing is to connect meaningfully, right? So I've kind of started to talk about that. As you make connections on LinkedIn, right, you want to make sure that they are meaningful and they're not just random. You're just trying to find these people because you know they're successful. Maybe they'll give you some free tips, right? And typically, the really successful people are going to be asked to be paid because that's what they do for their career. And so maybe some people are willing to share information without a cost, right? Well, think about what kind of value can you add as one seeking that information, right? And so I've been known to like buy someone a cup of coffee or tea or whatever it is, right? If they just have 15 minutes of their time to engage with me, either on a phone call really quick, I think that I can communicate and have an exchange a lot faster on a phone call than I can going back and forth on LinkedIn. Although some people, it depends on where they are, right? Because LinkedIn is not just like within your state, but it is the entire globe. And I have colleagues all around the globe and our time zones just don't work out to have a phone call. And so it is kind of a back and forth, right? So make it meaningful, make it worthwhile, that you're the person they want to talk to out of you don't know if they have, tens of people or tens of thousands of people reaching out to them, right? So this is your way to get to stand out. Buying someone a cup of coffee for me is just a kind gesture. It's the image of me saying, "Hey, I really admire the work that you do," and I try to pinpoint something specific, and then I'll ask my question, right, or my ask. Could I buy you a cup of coffee virtually to talk to you for about 10 minutes? And then I'll even go as far as to say, how's this time to this time work for you on this day? So it's just kind of, it jumps right to a date and they kind of say, sure, right? And I mean it, like right away. I'll send them like a Starbucks. I'll ask them something like, are you team Dunkin' or are you team Starbucks? And a lot of times people say, you don't have to do that, but some people really appreciate it, right? Some of us really like coffee. Okay, so that's our LinkedIn. That's a social media that's engaging with people in a very virtual way. In person, you would probably want to shake people's hands, like I said. Talk about the meeting that you're having. Maybe it's a specific topic in that therapeutic area. Maybe it's a skill set in that system. But really engage with them because you'll make a difference. And so we talked about those 4 areas, and now I'm going to jump into this career plan, right? So those are the areas in the career plan that we just talked about, right? Kind of envisioning where you want to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, because it goes by really fast, you guys, and what this regular review means. And so the first thing I like to say is that what I like to do, what my regular is, I have my kind of my official published resume or CV. It's a CV. And so it has a date on it. And so typically it'll say something like, the 8th of September 2022. And then I have one that's kind of a working draft, which is the same one as that September 8th one. But the only difference is that I'm adding to it when I think about the different changes. So typically, I mean, at the worst, I should update it annually just to make sure, if I moved or if there's any changes, I go ahead and make a change, right? So on my personal calendar, I have an annual review of my CV, okay? And this is whether I'm applying for a job or not, right? This is just to make sure that I'm current and what I know that I have as far as my skill sets and my training. But to be honest, it's more like quarterly. I really recommend that you review it quarterly on your calendar because so often we are trained in new systems and different add-ons of systems. I've seen a lot of buyouts within systems, and so it's nice to add those because it shows an additional skill set that you have, right? Um, Quarterly also, like I said, can encompass like education and certifications that you've acquired, um, or even like presenting. I know a lot of people will say where they presented, or for if they have a lot of presentations, they'll say who they present to, and they just list the organization so it doesn't take up too much space. And so you change it either on a time frame, annually or quarterly, or you kind of like me, I like it in a draft form. And so every time there's like these significant changes, right? So when there are significant changes, right? So not so much address. I said address, but I didn't really mean address. That's when, back in the time when we had to have an address. But if there's an associate address with, say, CRO or a sponsor you're working for or a previous employer, and there's a need for someone to fact check you, that's a time to maybe update it. References, right? Significant changes might also include, like I said, the education. Um, Skill sets, like I said, that kind of will add to, or maybe you kind of learn how, maybe this section's getting really long and you figure you should make a significant change that maybe you state it's a number of trials now or a number of publications, but you're really proud of this one. And then I put this when you have to, right? Hopefully, you don't have to resort to updating your CV when you're in a time crunch, because your manager said you have to, right? Because that typically you're racing around and trying to think, what did I do in the last year or 5 years? What protocols have I worked on? What therapeutic areas? Some of us are in very busy practices. I find that if you're in this bucket of you only changing it when you have to, a lot of information can go missing. And so that's not so much of a polishing up a beautiful product of this CV, or this career plan, right? And so I kind of am speaking in the realm of just the CV, but this goes to a review of your whole entire career plan, right? It's looking at your LinkedIn profile, it's looking at your CV, it's looking at all four of these aspects. And so schedule it out, right? I work off of a calendar. I work off of checklists. Things are kind of merged into each other. So when I click on it, they're like synced to like a spreadsheet. So I can kind of check, okay, are there any changes with, my employer or the projects? And so I like the working draft, just because it's kind of contemporaneously current, right? No one's asking for it. Maybe my manager does, and then there's only a few tweaks that I have to add to it. So just kind of think about what that regular looks like when it comes to your career plan. And so we're kind of reviewing this, what our initial objectives were. Have you defined and accentuated your image, on the exterior and on the interior? What kinds of skills can you upskill? What can you improve on? Explore what kinds of professional development are going to suit you best at this moment in time. Find those resources and make a plan. And I typically like to make a plan according, like I said, to a calendar, so I do have things planned out for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And whether I hit it or not, at least I'm in the ballpark, right? And I can tweak it year by year or quarter by quarter. And then, I've spent a lot of time talking about building and branding that CV, or that resume. And I mostly talked about the CV because that's what we use in this industry. And so you really want to make it your own. You saw my example was multiple pages. I had a header, I had a footer. I've seen some people use really great fonts and really harness the power of making that document theirs, because it really does shine through, especially if you have footers all the way across. The person looking at it knows that you understand how to use footers, right? Um, Understanding and harnessing the power of social media. Hopefully, this gets all of you out of your comfort zone and you're able to understand how you can really elevate yourself to the next level by being brave and getting out there and meeting new people and getting involved with organizations, volunteering, right? And so you can really, whether you're a follower or a leader, because we all sit in those places at one point or a time, or another. And so think about how powerful that is. And I want to say that you want to leave it on a good note, right? Because it goes back to that image, right? Does it all tie together? Does it make sense? Is it consistent that this person is a kind person, is a passionate person, is a confident person? Does everything online support that, right? And then, like I said, you want to review this plan regularly, right? Maybe you want to change. Maybe there's something you're stuck in, right? And so always challenge yourself when you think about that. So, in summary, I just want to leave with you that I have these beautiful pictures and there were some words. And so, I want you to think about your legacy and what you want to leave behind. What you leave behind definitely, affects the world. We just went through this big pandemic, and it can have a global impact. And whether you believe that or not, it does. When it comes to research, we all do our little piece and we can support one another. But it may be through your friends, it may be through your family, right? It may be through your community, however you decide to determine what that community is. Community to some people might be church, community could be their neighbors, community could be a professional organization, community could just be their family, right? Everyone has kind of their own idea of what community is. For me, it's I love my work, I love what I do, and I love the impact I've made in my career. Sometimes it's through your city. I live in the Phoenix metropolitan area. Right now, it's really hot and warm, but in about a month or so, it's going to be really beautiful, and everyone's going to start complaining about the winter. It could be just about your country. You're very patriotic, and that's the legacy you want to leave behind. Something that represents you. I put up the U.S. flag, but there might be other people who are not from the U.S., right? And so just kind of think about the impact that you can make as one individual, right? It can be as small, and I say small not as in a minute way, but just it could be as um, kind of in proximity, right? It could be an individual level, or it can be as big as a global scale. So I thank you for your time. If you'd like to reach out to me, I am found on LinkedIn. Hopefully that doesn't surprise anyone here. And we'll go ahead and take any questions.